Presentation is based on personality theories. Areas covered include introduction to personology, classification of personality theories or different approaches to personology, psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud, Erik Erikson's ego-psychological theory, B.F. Skinner's radical behaviorism, the socio-cognitive theory of about Bandura and Walter Mischel, Abraham Maslow's self-actualization theory, the self-concept theory of Carl Rogers, the alternative perspectives that includes the ecosystematic Eastern and African perspective. We start by introduction to personology. Areas to be covered are what is personology, why so many personality theories, personality, situation, and behavior. What is personology? Personology is that field of psychology that focuses on the study of personality, that is, the individual's most striking or dominant characteristics, also commonly known as personality psychology. Personality is the English word derived from Latin word persona, originally referring to the theatrical mask that people wear. A common definition of personality is the constantly changing but nevertheless relatively stable organization of all physical, psychological, and spiritual characteristics of the individual which determine his or her behavior in interaction with others and the environment. A personality theory is the outcome of a purposeful, sustained effort to develop a logical, consistent, conceptual, explanatory system for describing, explaining, and/or predicting human behavior. You might ask, why are there so many personality theories? The reasons are the complexity of humans and their behavior, practical and ethical problems in research, not possible to manipulate conditions to study all aspects of human nature. Each theory is therefore limited in its scope, hence there are many theories. It's complete knowledge of the person possible and desirable, you might ask. If we subscribe to the philosophy of determinism, it is possible to argue that human nature is ultimately knowable. On the other hand, if we support the philosophy of freedom, that is, human behavior is being determined by our choices and free will, then we cannot know all of human nature. The large variety of assumptions concerning the person and scientific research, that is, there are many orientations that inform how we see human beings and how we will study them. To explain further on personality, situation, and behavior, although all psychologists will probably agree that while both the individual's personality as well as the situation in which people find themselves influences their behavior, there are differences of opinions as to exactly what role is played by each of these aspects. This has given rise to three major conceptual positions, namely the personalism, situationalism, and interactionalism. Personalism. Personality is influenced chiefly by the individual's personality. Situationalism. The view that situation or environment is the only main determinant of behavior. Interactionalism. Behavior is the outcome of the interaction between the individual's characteristics and the situation in which the behaviors occur. We have a classification of personality theories, different approaches to personality, depth psychological theories, behavioral and learning theoretical approaches, person-oriented approaches, and alternative perspectives. The depth psychological theories suggest that behavior is determined by forces within the person of which he or she is mostly unaware. Behavioral and learning theoretical approaches emphasizes observable behavior and generally consider learning and environmental influences in behavior. Person-oriented approaches. This holds a positive view of human nature, which is humanistic existentialist. Alternative perspectives includes the ecosystemic, and ecosystemic means humans can be understood in context of systems. The Eastern, talks about more spiritual dimensions of human nature. The African talks about cultural influences on behavior, and there we have concepts like Ubuntu, which means sense of community and togetherness. To continue, we'll focus now on the psychoanalytic theory of Sigmund Freud. We have the background, the view of person underlying the theory, the structure of personality, the dynamics of personality, views on the development of personality, views on optimal development and psychopathology. In the background, I have a photograph of Sigmund Freud. He was born in 1856 of Jewish parents in Moreover, a small town in Austria. Later in life migrated to England, where he died in 1939. Whether one accepts or rejects any or all of his ideas, no one can reasonably deny that Freud has had an enormous intellectual impact on Western civilization in the 20th century. His early childhood experience with his parents could have influenced his ideas around a young boy's dislike for his father, who is perceived as a rival, and his desire to have sexual relations with his mother. He studied medicine and specialized in neurology, later to be known as the father of psychoanalysis. Some of the critical influences on his theory include: Freud's theory was developed on the basis of his contact with neurotic patients from higher social class in Vienna, Austria. He overemphasized the role of sex in human functioning. The influence of natural science led to him drawing an analogy between the human psyche, the steam engine which propels human action, which is a dynamic mechanistic model. The view of the person underlying the theory. There are three basic assumptions about human beings. The psychosocial conflict. A human being is caught up in a constant conflict between drives within the psyche, mainly the sexual and aggressive drives that demand continuous satisfaction, and the demands and norms, morals of society. Life is constantly a struggle to satisfy the psychic needs and the societal moral demands. This results in a permanent psychosocial conflict, the biological and psychic determinism. In line with his training and the spirit of science during his time, he believed that humans are driven by forces that are physiologically based and rooted within the body, thereby aligning himself with the doctrine of biological determinism. He also argued that behavior is determined by forces within the psyche, that is, the endless battle between the id instinct and the moral prescription of the superego, the mechanistic assumption. Also, as a result of the scientific influence, Freud believed that human beings function in a mechanistic way, that is, driven by some force. The structure of personality, according to Sigmund Freud. Here we have the levels of consciousness, which are three. They include the conscious level, that contains thoughts, feelings, and experiences of which individuals are aware. We have the preconscious level, which are information, usually like anxiety-provoking memories and experiences that can be recalled to consciousness with little effort. Unconscious level contains painful memories and forbidden drives. We also have the anatomy of personality. Freud came up with a tripartite division of personality, that is, three basic structures in the anatomy of personality, also known as the structural model of mental life. They include the id. The id is an innate primitive component of the psyche. It functions according to primary processes, that it is not capable of self-reflection, thought or planning, and pleasure principle, wish fulfillment, creating images of desired objects and fantasizing. The ego. The ego develops from the id, serves its needs by finding suitable objects for real drive satisfaction. It functions according to secondary process, that is, evaluate and weighs up a situation before any action is taken, and reality principle, that is, takes physical and social reality into account. Then we have the superego, that develops from the ego, acts within the person as a representative of society. It functions according to the moral principle, that is, pushes the individual by making him or her feel guilty about immoral wishes and behavior. Freud also has the dynamics of personality, motivation, Freud's drive theory, mechanistic assumption which maintains that human psyche functions with the help of energy converted from a physical biological form to psychic energy, according to principle of energy transformation. An example is that of a steam pressure converted to electrical energy. The E drives an internalized moral code contain transformed energy happening through the process of internalization. Drives have source, impetus, a certain quantity of energy or intensity, goal and object. Also have 4 types of drives: ego drives that are associated with individual survival, sexual drives that are primarily for the survival of species but are essentially erotic and intended for sexual pleasure, and death drives reflected in experiences like wars, murder, suicide are a reflection of a death wish. Anxiety. Freud describes anxiety as ego's reaction to danger and emanates from conflict between its forbidden drives and superego's moral prescripts. 3 types of anxiety: reality anxiety, which is fear or anxiety about actual dangers; neurotic anxiety, which is emotional response to the threat that its impulses will become conscious; moral anxiety, which is when the ego is threatened by punishment from the superego. We also have the defense mechanism. These are strategies used by the ego to defend itself against the conflict between forbidden drives and moral codes. Defense mechanisms include denial, repression, projection, fixation, regression, sublimation, displacement, and inter alia. We have dreams. Dreams produced by forces within the psyche and can either have manifest or latent or hidden content. Paraphrases. These are daily mistakes that are usually considered unimportant. Example: slips of the tongue, forgetting names of people well known to us. Freud does not see this as accidental, but as reflections of unconscious desires and fears. Views on the development of personality. Freud's developmental theory focuses particularly on the development of the sex drive and on how society and the child deal with the accompanying problems. He developed the psychosexual theory and identified 5 psychosexual stages that includes the oral stage, which is from birth to approximately end of first year. The lips and mouth are the main erogenous zones or source of sexual drive energy. Fixation leads to oral personality type. Anal stage roughly covers second and third year of life. Libidinal energy shifts from the mouth to the anal region. Fixation could lead to anal personality type. Example: excessive neatness. Phallic stage. From approximately 3 to 5 or 6 years, development of boys and girls take different directions, derived from the word phallus, meaning penis in erection. For a boy, penis is the main source of energy, develops Oedipus complex and castration anxiety. In the case of girls experience the Electra complex characterized by penis envy. The latent stage lasts from approximately 5 or 6 years to the start of puberty. Children of both sexes are mainly concerned with learning gender roles, showing little interest in the opposite sex. We have the genital stage, which commences with puberty and lasts until end of person's life, characterized chiefly by reawakening of sexual wishes, leading a person to find new ways of coping with these challenges. The views on optimal development and psychopathology. Optimal development. Freud does not provide a lot of detail on optimal development, primarily because his preoccupation was with psychic disturbance and conflict. For him, there is essentially no difference between healthy and psychologically disturbed people. The genital character represents the ideal of optimal human development. Genital character has legs fixations. has a strong ego that is mainly in touch with reality. The psychopathology. Psychological disorders are caused by imbalance in the structure of personality, that is, in situations where the ego is too weak to handle the conflict between the id and superego. Freud distinguished between three types of mental disorder, which are neurosis, personality disorder, and psychosis. Neurosis develops out of ego's inability to cope with the conflict between the id and superego. The personality disorders are deeply rooted, disturbed ways of dealing with conflict and the satisfaction of drives. Psychosis results from the collapse of the ego, resulting in the inability to deal with anxiety, thus leading to distortion of reality. Now, we go into the Erik Erikson's ego of psychological theory. And in the Erik Erikson's ego psychological theory, areas to be covered include the background, the view of the person underlying the theory, the structure and dynamics of personality, views on the development of personality, views on optimal development and psychopathology. I have a photo of Erik Erikson's background. Erik Erikson was born in 1902 in Germany. Though his parents came back from Denmark, he died in 1994. No academic degree qualification, but served as a professor at prominent universities like Harvard and Yale. He believed that his early life experiences could have led to identity crisis. He notes the influences of society on an individual's development. His theory differs from Freud's theory mainly because Erikson believed that human development continues throughout life and that people's lives can be rectified at subsequent stages. Erik Erikson was one of the ego psychologists, that is, those psychologists who felt that the ego plays a significant role in a person's life when compared to Freud's views on the role of the ego. Ego psychology emphasizes the integration of biological and psychosocial forces in determination of personality functioning. The view of the person underlying the theory. Central to Erikson's theory of ego development is the assumption that the development of the person is marked by a series of stages that is universal to humanity. The process whereby these stages evolved is governed by the epigenetic principle of maturation. The epigenetic principle maintains that 1. The human personality in principle develops according to steps predetermined in the growing person's readiness to be driven toward, to be aware of, and to interact with others. 2. Society in principle tends to be constituted as to meet and invite this succession of potentialities. The structure and dynamics of personality. The structure of personality, according to Erik Erikson, is that while Freud draws a clear distinction between the id, the ego, and superego, Erikson does not clearly offer such a distinction. Erikson does not clearly draw a sharp distinction between the person and the social environment, but describes them as being intertwined. The ego is that part of personality that makes coordinated and planned functioning possible. The ego develops throughout life as per the epigenetic principle dynamics of personality. Erikson hardly used the concepts of dynamics of personality or motivation. The striving for identity could be regarded as Erikson's version of the basic human motive. Views on the development of personality. The basic principle of development, Erikson contends that human development is the result of two simultaneous and complex influences, namely genetic factors, which are genetically determined ground plane, and social influences, which are society makes, demands, and creates opportunities. Developmental crisis. Each developmental stage is characterized by what is called a developmental crisis, arising from the interaction between genetic development and social influences. Ego strength emanates from the successful resolution of each developmental crisis. The 8 stages of development, according to Erik Erikson. We have infancy, basic trust versus mistrust, that connotes hope. It covers the first year of life. Development focuses largely on the mouth region, whereby the child learns to trust or mistrust a person. Early childhood, which is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Willpower roughly covers second year of life. Development largely focuses on the anal region. Holding and let go modalities are important during this stage. A play stage, initiative versus guilt. Purpose. From approximately 3 to 6 years, focus is largely on the genital region. Development of boys and girls take different directions, derived from the word phallus meaning penis erection. For a boy, penis is the main source of energy, develops Oedipus complex and castration anxiety. In the case of girls, girls experience the electro complex characterized by penis envy. The school age, industry versus inferiority, competence. Lasts from approximately 6 years to 12 years, children learn to gain recognition by producing things. Adolescents, identity versus role confusion, reliability. Commence with puberty at about 12 and ends with the beginning of early maturity. Between the ages of 18 and 25 years, the question "who am I" is very important at that stage. Early adulthood, intimacy versus isolation. Love extends from late adolescence until when person gets involved in marriage and family life, allows for one to share identity with another person. Adulthood, generativity versus self-obsession and stagnation. Care extends from early adulthood to about age of 65, interested in the development of the next generation. Maturity, ego integrity versus despair. Wisdom begins from somewhere between 60 and 70 years of age. People look back on their lives knowing that the end is near. Views on optimal development and psychopathology. Optimal development. Optimal development flows directly from Erikson's view of development throughout the lifespan. Optimally developed person can be seen as someone who has successfully resolved the developmental crisis of each stage. Psychopathology. He does not formulate comprehensive ideas on the nature and origin of mental disorder. The positive poles of the developmental crisis form the basis of optimal development, whilst the negative poles form the basis for mental illness. Now, we continue with the B.F. Skinner's radical behaviorism. And we're going to cover the background, the view of the person underlying the theory, the structure of personality and dynamics of personality, views on the development of personality, optimal development and psychopathology. The background, there's a photograph showing who B.F. Skinner was. B.F. Skinner, an American psychologist born in 1904, died in 1990. He followed a successful career as lecturer and researcher at Harvard University. He constructed a radical behaviorist theory, which maintains that behavior is explained as a lawful result of environmental factors. Skinner replaces mentalist explanation, that is, factors within a person, with environment-oriented explanations. The view of the person underlying the theory. Skinner does not formally put forward a view of the person. Instead, he prefers to write about behavior, which in his view should be the sole focus of psychology. The theory could be seen to be based on the theory of environmental determinism. Human beings are principally not different from animals. We are all the products of evolution. Though he recognizes the presence of subjective matters like feelings, perceptions, cognitions, and goals, Skinner is of the view that these do not cause or explain human behavior. Behavior, for him, is a result of what we get from the environment. The structure and dynamics of personality. The structure of personality, according to Skinner, the task of psychology is simply to study the laws that govern the behavior of the organism. Behavior is therefore what could be regarded as Skinner's structural concept of personality. He distinguished between respondent behavior and operant behavior. Respondent behavior is stimulated by something to which the organism responds. Something that precedes the response is called the stimulus. The operant behavior. Skinner's main concern is produced spontaneously and has effect on the environment. The dynamics of personality. Classical or respondent conditioning, which were Pavlov's concepts, Skinner was more interested in operant conditioning, that is, in cases where behavior is controlled by stimuli that succeed or come after it, that is, maintained by what he calls positive and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement occurs when a positive, pleasant stimuli is administered or added after the behavior has been performed and the likelihood of the behavior being repeated in the future increases. Negative reinforcement. It occurs when negative or unpleasant stimulus is removed, taken away after the behavior has been performed and the likelihood of that behavior being repeated in the future increases. Punishment is aimed at decreasing behavior. Extinction occurs when a specific type of behavior decreases and eventually disappears because the stimulus is withheld. Shaping is when the principle of operant conditioning are used to teach an organism complex and unusual behaviors. Views on the development of personality, optimal development, and psychopathology. Development of personality. Skinner did not produce a developmental theory of personality. His emphasis is on the effect of learning on human development. Optimal development. It can be suggested that for Skinner, optimal development lies in learning to behave in such a way that one receives primary and secondary reinforcers and avoids aversive reinforcers. Views on psychopathology. According to Skinner, psychopathology is undesirable behavior that is, like any other behavior, subject to the usual learning principles. Person with psychopathology can be considered as someone who has learned fewer effective behaviors. Now, we continue with the socio-cognitive theory of about Bandura and Walter-Mischel. Areas to be covered include the background and the view of the person underlying the theory. The background are the photographs of about Bandura and Walter-Mischel. About Bandura was born in December 4, 1925 in a small Canadian town. He is famous for his contributions to the field of education and to many fields of psychology, including socio-cognitive theory, therapy, and personality psychology, and was also influential in the transition between behaviorism and cognitive psychology. He is known as the originator of social learning theory that is renamed the socio-cognitive theory and the theoretical construct of self-efficacy, and it's also responsible for the influential 1961 Bobo doll experiment that demonstrated the concept of observational learning. Walter-Mischel, born February 22, 1930, is an Australian-born American psychologist specializing in personality theory and social psychology. He flew from his family to the United States of America after the Nazi occupation in 1938. He is best known for his groundbreaking study on delayed gratification, known as the marshmallow test. He is the Robert Johnson Niven Professor of Human Letters in the Department of Psychology at Columbia University. He stated that instead of treating situations as a noise or error of measurement, in personality psychology, the situation as perceived by the person should be included, and that by analyzing behavior in its situational context, the consistencies that characterize the individual will be found. These theorists agree with the other behaviorist-oriented theories by believing that behavior is primarily learned and thus focus on observable behavior. They, however, differ from the radical behaviorists. Some of the differences are: radical behaviorists oppose mentalistic explanations. Social-cognitive learning theories acknowledge the importance of unobservable mentalistic matters such as thoughts, expectations, symbolic processes, and inter alia. They recognize observational learning as the most important method of learning. Reinforcement is not considered an essential aspect of learning. Thus, the prominent social cognitive theories considered herein are Albert Bandura and Walter Mischel. The view of the person underlying the theory. The view of the person underlying the social cognitive learning theory can be considered a balanced one as it is. This theory is not linked to any extreme or one-sided view. Central to the social cognitive learning theorist's view of the person is interactional view, championed by Walter Mischel. This view holds that behavior cannot be determined exclusively by either the individual or the situation, but that it is interaction between the characteristics of the individual and those of the situation that determine an individual's behavior in a specific situation, also called theory of specificity. Bandura elaborated on this view and called it reciprocal determinism. Regards personality as the result of continuous interaction between personal, environmental, and behavioral determinants. Now we continue with the Abraham Maslow's self-actualization theory, and the areas covered include the background, the view of the person underlying the theory, the structure and dynamics of personality, views on optimal development and psychopathology. In the background, there's a photograph that shows Abraham Maslow's picture. He was born in 1908 in Brooklyn, New York, USA, and died in 1970. The most important theme in his work is the emphasis on human potential. He is regarded as a founder of the third movement, that is, a perspective that was not psychoanalytic nor behaviorist. The view of the person underlying the theory. Maslow's view of the person is basically optimistic, that is, acknowledges the positive aspect of human nature or inherent goodness of human nature. Self-actualization is the central motive behind all human behavior, defined as a motive to realize all true potential. Human behavior can also be explained in terms of need gratification, that is, human beings are always yearning to satisfy needs. When one need is satisfied, we tend to strive to satisfy other higher order needs. Maslow has a holistic view of human nature. A person is an integrated whole that cannot be studied piecemeal. The structure and dynamics of personality. Arrangement of needs in hierarchical fashion implies that person's development progresses through stages of need gratification, aimed at the ultimate goal of self-actualization. The lower the need in the hierarchy, the more urgent it is. In other words, lower order needs should be satisfied first before the higher level needs. The basic needs are physiological needs, the safety needs, affliction and love needs, self-esteem needs, self-actualization or self-realization needs. He distinguishes between deficiency and growth motives. Deficiency motives refers to first four levels and their gratification leads to reduction in tension. Growth motives are high-order needs such as the need for truth, beauty, and knowing. The views on optimal development and psychopathology. Optimal development. For Abraham Maslow, self-actualization is the ideal level of functioning. All humans strive towards this. Psychopathology. In line with the humanistic perspective, Maslow prefers to talk about human limitation instead of using concepts like psychopathology. Failure to gratify basic needs can lead to human limitation. Example, someone whose love needs are not met may end up being so obsessed with love that he can become pathologically dependent. Over-gratification of needs can also lead to new forms of pathology. Example, children whose basic needs are excessively gratified may fail to appreciate the gratification of lower order needs. Now, we continue with the Carl Rogers and the self-concept theory. The areas to be covered here include the background, the view of the person underlying the theory, the structure of personality and dynamics of personality, views on the development of personality, optimal development, and psychopathology. The background There is a photograph showing who Carl Rogers was. Carl Rogers is an American psychologist born on the 8th of January 1902 and died in 1987. He followed a successful academic career and held professorial positions at universities of Chicago and Wisconsin. Three central assumptions underlying Rogers' theory are: individual has constructive potential, individual is goal-directed, individual is capable of changing. Rogers' theory, influenced by both clinical practice and personal life experiences of early childhood, exposed to scientific thinking at early age, as his father was an engineer. The view of the person underlying the theory. Rogers' view of person is humanistic phenomenological. Humanistic view in the sense that he emphasizes the study of human being as a whole and that individual actively plays a role in actualizing inherent potential. Phenomenological in the sense that he stresses the part played by people's subjective experiences. The structure and dynamics of personality. The structure of personality includes the organism, the phenomenal field, and the self-concept. The organism is a total individual with all physical and psychological functions and interacts constantly with the world. The phenomenal field represents the totality of a person's perceptions and experiences. The self-concept is the differentiated part of the phenomenal field. It is the picture that a person has of himself or herself. There is also the ideal self, which is the self-concept that the individual would most like to have. The dynamics of personality include the actualizing tendency. According to Rogers, there is a basic tendency known as the actualizing tendency, which is the inherent tendency of organisms to maintain themselves and to expand or grow in order to become what they can be. The need for positive regard. This also directs human behavior. The need for positive regard from others and need for positive self-regard. Congruence and incongruence. When there is no difference between a person's experiential world and their view of themselves, that is congruence. And incongruence is the opposite of congruence. Views on the development of personality. Optimal development and psychopathology. Development of personality. People who are given unconditional positive regard are accepted by significant others for what they are, just as they are, and thus can lead to positive development. The optimal development. Fully functioning people have a growing openness to experience, an increasingly existential lifestyle, increasing organismic trust, freedom of choice, creativity, basic reliability and constructiveness, and a rich, full life. Views on psychopathology. An incongruent person who is always on the defensive stands the risk of having some form of pathology. We now continue with the alternative perspectives. The areas to be covered include the ecosystemic approach, the Eastern perspectives, the African perspectives. The ecosystemic approach, the development of the ecosystemic approach, the dynamics of personality. The development of ecosystemic approach originated from a number of fields of study such as systems theory, ecology, and cybernetics. General systems theory. This was developed by von Bartholomew. The theory maintains that systems consist of smaller elements or subsystems that can in turn are part of larger systems, a holistic view instead of a reductionist view. Ecology is the scientific study of the interactions among organisms and their environment. Example, interactions between organisms themselves, interactions between organisms and the non-biological environment. Cybernetics originally refers to the principle that regulates the dissemination of information or messages. Cybernetics principally relate to the basic principles underlying the control, regulation, exchange, and processing of information. Main assumption. The same basic principles are involved whether we are concerned with machinery, organisms, or social structures. They affect order cybernetics, second order cybernetics, and third order cybernetics. In first order cybernetics, it is assumed that the observer can take up a position outside the observed system. In second order cybernetics, the observer becomes part of the system and therefore the observations made are thus colored by the observer. In third order observation, the interest is on understanding how the observers and the systems influence each other and co-evolve to high order levels. The dynamics of personality. Self-determinism of systems. In other words, systems are not influenced by independent external agents, by their structure and how they are organized. Systems are autonomous and self-regulating. Fluctuations in the systems are referred to as perturbation. Example, a psychologist who helps a family by introducing a new way of seeing reality compared to that of the individual or family could be considered as perturbation. The Eastern perspective. Western psychology is realizing that it cannot claim to possess universal truth about human nature and functioning. Western psychology influenced by the positivist, objective view of the person. Eastern psychology originates from the religious tradition and is premised on subjective observation and direct subjective experience. Western psychology revolves around individualism, whilst Eastern psychology emphasizes collectivism. The African perspective. In the African perspective, there is the background, the view of the person underlying the African perspective. The background. The Association of Black Psychologists, established in America in 1968, made the first attempt to promote an Afrocentric psychology. The main aim of the association was to establish the roots of African psychological thinking and to critique the dominant Eurocentric or Western psychology, while the novels laid the foundations for the kind of Afrocentric psychology. Nobles accuses Western formulations of personology as scientific colonialism, because these formulations lay down Western formulations and conceptualizations as standards against which the behavior of all the people of the world should be understood and explained. Nobles argued for the development of an indigenous psychology, that is, a psychology that is developed and perceived from a uniquely African perspective. View of the person underlying the African perspective. It was founded on a holistic view of human nature. Example, the works of Steve Biko, the works of Nhlala Nkinze, Lisiba Baloyi, and Inter-Ileah are useful. The daily functioning of a traditional African is fundamentally religious. The African perspective focuses on collective existence. Example, Ubuntu. According to Mbiti, the personhood and identity of an African is entirely embedded in his or her collective existence. Such a collective orientation have implications in terms of psychopathology. Example, somebody becoming psychologically disturbed when they feel they are no longer in touch with their ancestors. This brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you.